Hey guys, this week we want to teach y'all a little bit about why you install rings on certain lures. Certain lures come without the rings in them. So you have to purchase them separately in packs. And determining on what bait you're going to use is going to determine what ring size to use. You can see this is a big Rebel, like a shad bait, a big topwater bait, so it requires a bigger ring, of course. When you get to the smaller crankbaits, some of them come out of the packs without rings on them. And the bait cannot work properly if you don't put the rings on them. When you tie directly to the iron wire that they're made with, it doesn't give it the movement it needs. So a lot of them come with the rings, but if they do not, you won't want to put one on. And not a big one, of course. Like I was telling you, size ring per bait. Especially on a lipless crankbait such as rattle traps, red-eye shads, and so forth. You just about have to have a ring on those. That way the bait can kick freely without being attached directly to the line. It gives it more movement. And that's going to be with just about any bait besides, say, some people like a spook to tie directly to that. Top waters, you can do that. I like a ring on it. It still gives a little bit extra kicking action. Now there's times that you do not apply rings, and that would be on something such as a buzz bait. You can see the opening in the wire. Spinner baits, jig heads in general, those do not require rings. You will attach directly to the point with your line. Line twists with rings, there's a little secret there. Put a swivel right on my rings if I'm using a big spoon, and that keeps my twist down from where the spoon kicks, and it sometimes has a tendency to kink up your line a little bit. Whopper plopper baits like this the same way. Rings on the nose, you don't have to have them. Once again, I recommend them. Same thing, choose the ring per bait size. Definitely on your little crankbaits, it's a necessity. On all your big crankbaits, you'll notice your big cranks, they have the big ones on them. That's because the durability of these baits. They're bigger baits, they're harder manufactured, have a little more plastic, so require a little bit bigger ring and a little bit application on these bigger crankbaits. Of course, you would not use a ring on the frog or anything like that. Strictly baits that are going to be crankbaits, top waters, so forth and so on. I just want to give y'all some more tips about crankbait bills, why people have so many crankbaits on, what time of year is best for what crankbait. Early in the spring like now, we've just come off the winter stuff. Water's been cold, water's still real cold. Fish have a tendency to move up in the shallower waters. Well, when that happens, you have to know what baits to throw to keep from getting hung and what size bills. For an example, this is a XD10. Now this bait here is made to run from 12 to 20 foot of water depending on line size. This bait would be used more in the winter time or dead summer because of the bill. It's designed to go really deep to get on the ledges, drops, or brush piles, or trees, as far as that matters, that you see or know. And it goes through the trees and hits the rocks and stuff, and it's just a deeper diver bait based on the bills. The bills is how you determine how deep a bait goes. So here's another one that doesn't have quite as big a bill, but back again with 12-pound test line, this bait will run 10 foot deep. You can drop down to 10 with this and maybe get 14 to 15 foot. Line size matters on these. This bait could be thrown in the winter, summer, or spring. It's a medium-sized bill. Say the fish are staged up in 10 foot of water and 8 foot. This would be more of the bait you would use for that range of depth versus the bigger bill designed to run deeper. Then we'll get to a medium to shallow running bait. See the smaller bill? This bait once again is designed to run 4 to 6 foot deep, depending on line size. This would be 6 to 12-pound test line. You really don't want anything bigger because it'll mess up the movement of the lure even though the ring is still on there. This is, once again, this is an all-time bait. You can use this bait anytime. This is not necessarily spring, summer, winter, fall. It's all time of the year bait. Come with rattles in them. That's very important. Some don't rattle, but that's all in what you like. Then we'll get down here to what everybody calls a square bill crankbait. It's literally, the bill is literally square on it, so that's what they call a square bill. This is designed to give the bait more wiggle, makes it kick more than it does wobble top to left and right. It gives it more of a shape, puts off a little more vibration. And as you see, this is a square bill. Now this bait will also run 2 to 5 and 6 foot, determining on line weight. It all comes back to the line on all these baits. And once again, here's a L bill shad wrap. The bill's quite a bit different on this. This is really designed to run shallow and deflect off of stuff. So when this bait's coming through there and it hits a rock, it's designed to deflect instead of just keep running over the edge and stuff. Once again, that's back where there are rings on these baits. And this is 12-pound to 6-pound test line on this bait. You could maybe get away with some 15, but once again, once you get the big line, it's harder to throw, and there's a little less action in the bait with that bigger line. And yes, of course, this is a top water, but it's a lipped bait. This is a top water. You snatch it and it spits water. We'll get over to these more. You notice that this one does not have a ring on it. It would be nice, but you can throw them without rings. And when you're in the store and you're looking to see how deep crankbaits run and stuff, if you'll look on the packages, such as this one here, there is depth ranges for each bait. It tells you, you know, how deep it'll run, the weight of it, and all the information you'll need is mostly on the packs that you purchase. I was going to show you some more stuff about some lipless crankbaits. Lipless crankbaits are one of the best baits to use spring, summer, winter, and fall. You can use these baits year-round. They can be fished anywhere from 1 foot to 40 foot. And once again, this would be a mono bait. If you throw it on braid, it would be more dingy water, something of that nature. But these baits are designed that you can fish them from 1 foot to 50 foot. They're made to vertical jig. Here's a bigger one, the 3/4 ounce. Got the bigger hooks on it. Once again, they all rattle. Ones that don't rattle are more, they're not as loud, of course, as this one, but the ones without rattles make a little more wobbly sound without it. More rattles. Once again, these baits come in multiple colors, hook sizes. You can change the hooks out. Some people like to change the hooks out on some of these baits when they purchase them, such as rattle traps. But these here come with the good hooks on them, so you really don't have to change these out. This is a Cordell Spot. They've sold these for many years. Red eye shads, pogo shad. Y'all probably haven't seen these in years and years, but these are pogo shads. We don't really use these anymore, but we're getting back to lipless crankbaits. And of course, the diamond shads, multicolor. And use a, you know, most people have standard colors they like. I'm a pretty much standard man myself, but pick and choose what you like. Go out and try them. They're a great way to catch fish. Now these baits, when you throw them, they sink. So as soon as they hit the water, if you're fishing shallow, you need to get it moving or you're going to stay hung. These baits go straight to the bottom. So when they hit the water, if you're not out off the bank to where you're planning to fish deep, you want to move it pretty quick to get it out. Then you can slow down your retrieve as you get further out. But these baits are definitely something you want to keep in the boat in the winter and the springtime for sure. Alright, presentation on these baits. There's multiple ways of doing this. You can throw them up on the bank and you can burn them out. You can yo-yo the bait. I like yo-yoing and burning it myself. Now, vertical jigging these is another good technique. If you find the fish 20 foot deep under the boat, vertical jig these baits. You're still going to want to throw these around rock and stump and big structured banks. There's plenty of places on mud flats for these baits. A lot of fish springtime of the year on these lipless baits will be on mud flats and gravel. So wind-blown pockets, once again, from the bank to 20 foot, depending on the time of the year, where you're at. These will work on any body of water we have in the state of Tennessee and anywhere else. That's why you see the professional anglers and stuff with so many rods, because they have to have a select amount of baits. They can't just be down tying all the time. But these baits here are strictly, man, they're great lures, great presentation at certain times. And like I said, you can yo-yo it, you can jig it, you can burn it. There's a, you know, burn it, stop it, burn it, stop it. There's just a multiple way of using these baits. So, all right, presentation on these crankbaits and the lipless crankbait. What I do with the bigger crankbaits and the smaller ones, I'll cast them and crank them down. When I finally feel the bottom, I quit burning it so it's just not jabbed down into the bottom. And you can actually raise your rod a little bit to get it to run a little shallower, and you can raise it up higher to keep it even shallower. That really works well with the lipless crankbait. So I throw it up there on the bank, I'm holding my pole up to get it out. I don't necessarily have it down and winding it. I'm holding it up till I get to the boat, then I gradually drop my pole. Because if you throw it there on the bank and then you drop your rod tip, it's just going to be all in it like it's supposed to be, but you're going to get hung a lot more. So when you throw up there, you can snatch it, wind it, stop winding it, just whatever technique you feel works. But the rattles and the lipless crankbaits are great pretty much any time of the year for any species of fish, whether it's bass, hybrid, stripe. You know, I've caught crappie on these baits. It's not something that I would crappie fish with, but you can also troll rattling baits in the summer when fish are in the jumps. You can troll these lipless crankbaits and of course the crankbaits itself, but it's all in the time of the year and how you like to fish. On lures, I want to just touch base very lightly on what pound test line and what type of line is best for lures. They still make the monofilament, of course, and you can get this in clear blue, and green. This is actually 6 pound test. On crankbaits and 6 pound test, I like mono when I'm throwing my smaller crankbaits on 6. It has a tendency when you get hung shallow to let the bait float back up, where as far as braid or fluorocarbon isn't as buoyant. So you can actually snap these baits loose a little better versus having to go up there and jab and get them out of the rocks yourself. And that's the benefit of using mono on shallow running crankbaits versus braid or fluorocarbon. Now let's go back to some braid stuff. Top waters, spooks, buzz baits, spinner baits, stuff like that. Direct, people just love braid because there's zero stretch in braid. Braid does not stretch, so when the fish hits it, you have a direct contact with that fish to put the hooks in his mouth. Mono has a tendency to stretch. Fluorocarbon has less stretch, but once again, fluorocarbon sinks. So as you're working your your top water, there'll be a bow under the water and it's hard to keep that line up. And that's when you go back to the braid or the mono to help keep it on the surface a little better. Red eye shads, lipless crankbaits. I'm going to go back to my mono again, or maybe fluorocarbon, either one, depending on where you're at. And color matters. Green, I'm just a big green guy. I like green line in the water. It kind of hides it a little bit. And that's definitely something that, you know, you could use for both. Now when you get to stuff like a jig head, people like to take braid and make fluorocarbon leaders to these to where it's not as visible to the fish. So some people might tie 3-foot fluorocarbon leaders onto their braid, or 5 feet. And that's just for the visibility purpose of the fish, not to be able to see the line. And once again, that would be lead heads, jigs, shaky heads, drop shots, anything of that nature. Let's go to a topwater frog, for example. Mono stretches, fluorocarbon doesn't stretch that much, but braid definitely does not stretch. So this would definitely be a braid bait. Something that you're going to throw in structure around limbs, logs, something thick, something that can damage your line. That's when you'll go back to the braid. Buzz bait, same way. You can throw these on braid. I'm going back to fluorocarbon or mono with such as a reaction bait or a jointed bait. That bluegill's a good little bait though, jointed in the middle. These baits have come a long ways. Same thing with your Sammy. These smaller baits, you can get away with using 12 and 15 pound mono because they're so finessable about working. It takes a little bit lighter line. You try to use 20 on this and it just doesn't work as good as it would with 12 or 15, even though it has the ring on it. It's just line diameter per bait size. And then you take the big crankbait. Now a lot of people like throwing this on 12 pound and 15 pound fluorocarbon or mono. This is not, once again, not necessarily really a braid bait where you throw with braid. But, you know, every application's different, whether it be jigs, crankbaits, top waters, different types of line. Y'all just, you know, check your stuff and try out tips and techniques like this, and we hope that will help you out. See y'all just in a minute for some more Southern Woods and Waters.